Good morning, rest.
Good evening, everybody.
Kabbalah, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. It looks like we're at the Gimel. So we'll continue from there. Okay. So, as we already mentioned before, it says here, "En osin gvina b'yom tov." Right? We're not allowed to make cheese on Yom Tov. So he says here, Bet Yosef, "Bayad ifshita bepek Rabbi Eliezer de Milah." So he said this was a question in the Talmud that was answered in Shabbat Kuf Lamed Daled. עמוד א', וטעם המפרש בגמרא משום דהבה אפשר לגוון מאתמול וגבינה דאתמול חשובה כשל היום. So he says the reason why you can't make cheese on Yom Tov is because you could have done this before, right? And it's not going to be any better if you make it today, right, than yesterday. So therefore, since the quality doesn't really improve, so we say, right, that don't do it on Yom Tov. Okay, so then he goes on. Kasina Yerushalmi, right? It says in Yerushalmi, Soper Kama de Betza, in the end of first parak of Betza, Ma'od le'amid chalav al Omer et im Omer at afu cholev u'ma'amid miyom tov lechol v'katvu Ran v'soper bet Betza v'agot Maimon bet gimel melchot yom tov. Right, B'yom Tov. So, same thing over there. We see, right, that in this Gemara also, that it talks about the issue of making cheese on Yom Tov, and it's forbidden. Yeah. Okay. So then he goes on. The Perek HaMatzniya. There's another Gemara on Shabbat Tzadikei Amud Aleph. Tan Rabbanan, HaCholed והמחבץ והמגוון כגרוגרת, המחבט והמרבץ והרודה חלות דבש שגג בשבת חייב. חטאת והזיד היום ביום טוב לוקח 40. דברי רבי אליעזר, וחכמים אומרים, אחד זה ואחד זה אינו אלא משום שבות, right? So, there's a dispute over here between these rabbis, right? According to the first opinion, the Chachamim, I'm sorry, Rabbi Eliezer, he says that, it's a Torah prohibition here, right? Making cheese. The Chachamim say, no, this is only rabbinical prohibition, right? So, in Perish Rashi explains here, Echad ze ve'echad ze, Echad Shabbat ve'echad Yom Tov, right? Whether it's Shabbat or Yom Tov, doesn't really matter. It's all the same. So what does that mean? On both days, it's rabbinical, the prohibition. כתב רבנו ירוחם, says רבנו ירוחם, שמפני ברייתא זו כתבו קצת מפרשים דחולה ומחבץ בן גוון אסור. So he says, because of this braita, they wrote, right, that you're not allowed to do this, it's forbidden. וכן הרודה חלות דבש, אפילו דבש הראוי לאכילה. Says also, it says, if you take honey from the honeycomb, right, even though it's fitting to eat that, they didn't allow this. So what does that mean? That they only allow things like, cooking and baking, when it comes to consumption. Things like this. אבל בתוספות כתבו, דלא אסרו אלא רודה חלות דבש. But Tosfot says they only forbade the issue of the honey. עלה קאי בפרק המצניע ביום טוב, לוקה, אבל חולה ומחבץ ומגבן צורך יום טוב מותר דמלא כשהוא בן יומו, ולודה חלות דבש, תאסור דווקא דבש בדביש, אבל ראוי לאכילה מותר. ואפילו שאפשר לעשותו מערב יום טוב, מן התורה, כל אוכל נפש מותר, right? So this opinion is saying something else, right? A different approach altogether. What we're saying over here is that it's really allowed to do this on Yom Tov. Why is that? Because after all, it's for consumption. So he says, therefore it's allowed. Okay. So he's telling you, right, that if you're doing it for the needs of Yom Tov, you're allowed. Interesting. So who was this opinion here? Tosfot, yeah. Interesting. Okay. So then he goes on, ולפום ריהתה לא משמע מדברי התוספות בפרק המצניע שרוצים להתיר לגמרי. But it says, that Tosfot doesn't seem like they want to allow this altogether. אלא לומר, דלא מצר מדאורייתא. What they want to say is that it's not really forbidden from the Torah. So there seems to be a contradiction between two places in Tosfot, right? One place seems to say that it's allowed altogether. The other place is saying it's not, it's not really allowed, but from the Torah it's allowed. But from the rabbis it's forbidden. Interesting. וגם לא הזכירו שם, דהד הקטן אלוקה, לא כאה אלא הרודה חלות דבש. So also he says they didn't really mention there that which it says, right, that he's lashed on that, it's only talking about the issue of the honey. כל מקום אפשר שמקום אחר כתבו כדבריו. So it says it's possible that in a different place they wrote like his words, or שבנוסחאות התוספות שבידו, or it could be that the text of the Tosfot that he had היה כתוב כן, it was written like that. ומי הוא? על מה שכתב לדעת התוספות, but that which he wrote, that according to Tosfot, the מגוון לצורך יום טוב מותר, that you're allowed to make cheese on Yom Tov, right? If you for the needs of Yom Tov, the מעלה כשהוא בן יומו. Why? Because it's even better when it's fresh, right? Wow. Okay. All right. Yeshli Tzumah. So he says there's a wonderment about that. Zeha Ibayalan the Pek Rabbi Elazar the Mila the Pashtinan the Surah, right? So, but it says, but in the Talmud, right? We paskin that it's forbidden to do that. So then, how is it that Tosfot says it's allowed? Okay, interesting question. All right. So therefore, the more plausible, right, way of understanding Tosfot is the other Tosfot that we see that it's really forbidden according to the rabbis, and it's only permitted from the Torah. Okay, interesting. והר"ן בריש פרק עין צדין הביא ברייתא זו, so the Ram brings this ברייתא, כתב דמשמע דהא דקתן ההזיד ביום טוב לוקה, so he says that which it says, right, that if he did it on purpose on Yom Tov, he's lashed. לא קאי המחבץ ומגוון. It's not talking about the issue of making cheese. דהא גיוון ביום טוב לא מצר אלא מדרבנן. Why? Because he says only forbidden from the rabbis. ואך לי מוכח מדלא הייתה אך ברייתא the Perek Rabbi Eliezer. Also, right, it's apparent because he doesn't bring this right in this Perek, the Milah, ki Ibayalan Mao Legaben. When we said, right, what's the din to make cheese? Katav Rivash B'tshuva. So says the Rivash, Ma shemotzin achema me'achalav asur mishum borer. So he says, removing the fat from the milk, he says forbidden. Why? Because you're doing selection, right? Because it's like, it looks like you're making butter, like something like that. Right, so that's how you make butter, right? You remove the fat, and take out the water from there, becomes butter. So it says even forbidden to do this by way of a goy. Because it's forbidden to tell a goy, right? So it says even something which is rabbinically forbidden. Okay, interesting. That's the Rivash. Okay. Wow. So we have a variety of opinions over here going on. So let's see how it comes out. So it says Shulchan Aruch like this: "En osin gvina b'yom tov." Right, as we said, not allowed to make cheese on Yom Tov. Then ma'amidin chalav b'yom tov. Right. Also, he says in the parentheses, not allowed to make butter either. Right. So they're both forbidden. Right. So make sure you do this before, right, before Yom Tov. Ve'hu adin de'en osin chema min ha'chalav b'yom tov. Right. So same thing as we said. Right. Not allowed to make any of these things, right? Whether it's cheese, whether it's cottage cheese, right, or things like this, or butter, right? All these things are forbidden to do, right? So from the language, right, you get that we're talking here about, it's rabbinically forbidden. It's not forbidden from the Torah. Okay, very good. That's that. So again, right, to reiterate, what was the reason why we forbade this on Yom Tov? We said because it's something you could have done before, and it doesn't really improve the taste or whatever. And this is the reason why we don't allow it. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll go on. So he brings here the tour who says, then gozizin hayarak b'misperaim. Let's see this tour inside better. Right, so it says here in the tour, and gozizin hayarak b'misperaim. So what is he saying over here? Don't cut the vegetables with scissors, he says. In other words, don't use that type of scissor that you use, to cut it from the ground. Like a certain kind of a thing, right? Cutting utensil there, right? We're not talking about your household scissors over here. We're talking about the one that you use to cut it from, to cut it down from the ground, right? To disconnect it. Okay. ומתקנים את הקונדס והעכביות אף על פי שמותר לטרוח לתקן. Okay, so let's see the Bet Yosef here. So says Bet Yosef, right? There's a bright over here. What's the source of this? Perek HaMevi Kadayayin, right? In the Talmud. Where is this? Lamed Dal Amud Aleph in Betzaf, right? So Pirish Rashi explains this. And gozin hayarak, right? We don't cut the vegetables. Hatalush sheyesh bo rashe alim nirkavin ukimushin and gozin otam b'tisporet shelo shegozin ba min hamechubar. Right. So Rashi explains more in detail. Right. What are we talking about here? He says you have vegetables, right, which are somewhat, rotten, right, on the top or whatever, and you want to cut the rotten pieces off. To save only the good stuff, right? So he says, don't use those scissors, as we said, right? That you use to detach it from the ground. Today, we don't do so much of this, most of us, right? Unless you have a little farm in your backyard somewhere, right? Whatever. So why can't you use those scissors, he says? Because somebody who sees you using those scissors will think that, you cut it down today, right, from the ground. You cut it off. So that's not allowed. So therefore, right, in order to avoid that impression, that's why the rabbis forbade that. Right, so it says, kundas v'akaviot. Okay, so let's read the tour a little bit more. There's a little bit more here. In the tour, let's see that. So it says here in the tour, ומתקנין את הקונדס והקוויות, אף על פי שמותר לטרוח לתקן צורכי סעודה ביום טוב. מכל מקום, מה שאפשר לשנות מדרך כל יעשה. Oh, so he says, right, that there are certain vegetables, okay, that are difficult to cut and prepare. But nevertheless, he says we're allowed to do it, even though there's a lot of exertion involved here, right? A lot of, big headache. Nevertheless, you're allowed to do it. Why? Because after all, right, you're doing it to eat it, right? On the seudah, you're in your meal. So why not? Whatever it takes, right? So therefore, we don't say, oh, you're doing so much exertion there, right? To take it easy, We don't say that. So therefore, you're allowed to do that. But then he says, right, that in any case, if you can do some kind of a shinui, right, with this, it's good idea to do so. Whatever you can do, some kind of a shinui, some kind of an abnormal manner. Okay, it's not always possible to do that, by the way. But if you can, you can. You cannot, you cannot. Okay, so let's see. Let's go back there. So the Bet Yosef we pretty much saw. So right, but Yosef just says one thing right about this. He says, "Kundas ve'akaviyot." Right, we're talking about minei yarakot sheyesh torach v'tikunan. We're talking about vegetables which are difficult to prepare. Nevertheless, we're allowed to prepare them. After all, right, we're doing it for our meal. So what's the problem, right? So therefore, it's allowed. Good. Okay, so let's go to Shulchan Aruch. Right, so says Shulchan Aruch, אין גוזזין את הירק במספריים שדרכן נחתכם בהן מן המחובר. So it says, right, if you're cutting vegetables, do not use those scissors, right, they're using to cut it down from the ground. So we already explained the Beit Yosef. What's the reason for that? Because people may think, right, did you cut it down today from the ground, so you harvested. We don't want to create that impression. So this is the reason why it's forbidden. Okay, good. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we will move ahead. Right, so this one we already did, right? Also, this Shulchan Aruch. So let's read it. Right, as we said, right, these are vegetables which are difficult to prepare. Nevertheless, right, you're allowed to prepare them on Yom Tov since you're eating, right, your meal. So says here the Rama, right, another thing, which is that let's say you want to, right, eat some radishes, right, on Yom Tov. So he says you're allowed to salt them, like even a large quantity. If you want to eat all that stuff, right? If you want to eat it, don't do it for tomorrow, right? Obviously. Even though you're not allowed to do this on Shabbat. So some are stringent about that also on Yom Tov. So here, Shabbat and Yom Tov are different, right? Because when it comes to Shabbat, we don't allow you to do a large number, not large amount. Here, they do allow you. On Shabbat, we tell you, right, do a little bit, whatever you're eating now, little by little. Okay, that's the story there. All right, good. Let's see what's next on the menu. Let's see what's on the menu here. Yeah, okay. So now we're going to Het. So let's see where we are here. All right, so he brings here the tour. So let's look at the tour. Let's look inside there. So it says the tour like this. Right, so it says, המביא כדי יין ממקום למקום, לא יביאם בשר וקופה, לתת לתוכה 4 או 5 כדים ביחד, אלא יביאם לפניו בידו, אחד אחד, או שניים. So he says, right, if you want to carry stuff, from one place to another. So what are we talking about, right? Food and drinks and things like this. So he says, right, that, so what's the example? You're bringing like jugs of wine, right? Jugs of wine. Oh, right. From one place to another. So he says, you know what? Don't do it like the way you do on the weekdays. So what does that mean? How do you do on the weekdays? You take like a big container, like some kind of a box, right, or whatever, and you put the jugs inside there. So you carry like 4 or 5 at a time, which is heavy. It's heavy there, right? So therefore, he tells you, right, what do? Do a shinui a little bit, right? Don't do Yom Tov like that. So what do? Right? Bring it like 1 by 1 or 2 by 2. Don't bring 4 and 5 together because it's very heavy. It's a lot of exertion, and so you shouldn't do that in Yom Tov. It looks like like a weekday activity. So he says, right? He gives you here the more explanation. The because if you're bringing it right just like 1 by 1 or 2 by 2, so then it's apparent that you're doing it for Yom Tov only, right? You're not doing it for tomorrow. I mean, so we don't want it to look like you're doing it for tomorrow. So bring little by little, right? So don't bring too much, Okay. And says also anything similar like that. He says, whatever similar. In other words, don't carry big bundles together, like you do on weekdays, which looks like you're doing it for tomorrow. Just do enough for today, and that's it, right? So it doesn't look like suspicious. Okay. כן, כל קצב בזה, right? ישנה מדרך כל אפילו אין בשינוי קלות, right? קלות המסע, ואין, right? So he says, right, that you should always try to do that, like differentiate between Yom Tov and a regular day, So do like shinui, do lots of shinui there. Whatever you can do, right, to make it apparent that you're doing it for today only. And he says, right, that even applies if you're not doing it for the sake of making it easier, just, that it should look better. ואם אי אפשר לו לשנות כגון שזימן הרבה ערכים וצריך למהר, רבי לפניהם יעשו כדרכו. So then he says in the end, right, if you have like a party going on, right, you invite a lot of guests, right, you got, company coming, right, 10 people, 20 people, so you need a lot, large volumes, right, large quantities of wine and stuff, right, whatever. So then he says, right, if you're in a hurry, there's no way to make a shinui, so you can do it in the regular way, there's no other way to do it. Right, so, if you're in a rush, people are coming over, you got company coming over. So then he says you can do it in the normal way, right? If you have to, they have no choice. Like they're coming over like ASAP, like right now, so you don't have time to play games.
Rabbi, which looks worse, carrying a large bundle or making multiple trips? Does that not also look bad that you're going back and forth?
Right. So that's the good question. That's exactly what we're dealing with here. So he's telling you, right, better to do it multiple trips. Why? Because it doesn't look good. That's the thing, right? So you're not really reducing your effort, right? You're looking very cool, you're looking very good there, that's what it is, right?
Wouldn't like one and done be better than like if you're doing it over multiple trips, you have more opportunities for people to see you like going back and forth, don't you? That doesn't look worse?
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it's true, but every time they see you, right, with one, they're happy with you, what I mean? They're happy with that. Because you don't look like you're doing, heavy duty, heavy lifting, right? That's the thing, So if they see you with one, they say, "Oh, gee, he's such a good Jew. He's bringing his food for Yom Tov." But if they see you, with big bundles, they're gonna say, "Oh, look at this guy, right? He's doing industrial work on Yom Tov. Right? He's doing industrial stuff there, right? Right? He's doing his chores and labor, on Yom Tov, for the next week or next day, whatever." That's why we don't want that. So okay, right, that's the story there. Okay. So let's see the Bet Yosef. So yeah, says here. So brings Bet Yosef here. He brings a source, right? Which is what? In Betzach Kaftet Amud Bet. Rashi explains, Makom leMakom, from one place to another, Betocha Techum, right? So he's talking, he says we're talking about in the same vicinity, right? In other words, in the same town, whatever. Oh, Eruv, or let's say you have an Eruv, right? One or the other, right? So, because otherwise you wouldn't be allowed to carry, but the truth is, right, that I'm wondering why does he say this? Because okay, I get it. I get why he's saying this. Right. The reason why I was wondering about this is because on Yom Tov, we already said, right, you don't need an Eruv on Yom Tov. Didn't we say that to carry? But now Rashi's telling you that you need an Eruv, right? What happened with that? So the answer is like this, right? I just, it came to my head. Rashi's not talking about the Eruv that we're talking about, with the, in other words, the Eruv that's in the town. He's talking about an Eruv you make to extend your boundary from the town, right? Which is something, that, we don't do so often today, right? And nowadays, I've never done this in my life. Because the towns are so large, we usually don't need to do that. So that's what Rashi's talking about, right? So in other words, what is he telling you? You can carry, but don't leave your vicinity. When I say vicinity, I mean to say, right, don't leave the town boundaries, because you're not allowed to do that. Even on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to do that. To go beyond the town boundaries. Unless you make an Eruv, right? That's okay. But we're not talking about the Eruv that we have in the city, right? That's a different Eruv. Okay, so how do you make that Eruv, by the way? Anybody know how you make this Eruv to extend your boundary?
With food, wasn't it?
Right, it's food, yeah. Where did you see this, by the way, if you remember? You remember the place where you saw that?
We learned it from the loss of prayer, I think, wasn't it?
Okay, interesting, whatever. But anyway, right, the source for that whole discussion is in Masechet Eruvin. Oh, you said Eruvin?
Eruvin later on.
Okay, there you go. Right, yeah, it's in Eruvin. This whole discussion is in Eruvin, right? That's what it is. So that's the source for all these halachot, So there's different types of eruvs, that we have. They're all called eruv, but there are different types. Okay. So anyway, right, let's go on. So it says, "V'lo yavi basar v'kupa." As we said, right, you shouldn't put them into like a basket or something, or some kind of a box, like many jugs of wine, come on, how thirsty are you? How many are you going to drink today? I mean, usually, right, you don't need that much wine on one day, so that's why it looks suspicious. Okay. So then he goes on. לתת 3 ו4 בתוך קופה ויסיים משום דנראה כמעשה דחול, right, לשאת מסעות, right? So it looks like weekday activity. That's what he's saying, right? That's what it is, You're doing like labor, like carrying around, big loads. I mean, what's with that, right? אבל מביא על הכתפו. But, right, what you're allowed to do is to bring it on your shoulder, right? What does that mean? אחד אחד, right? 1 by 1 or 2 by 2, right? That's okay. It doesn't look like weekday activity, right? It looks like, you're just, right, bringing your Yom Tov supply, which is okay, right? That's no problem with that. Okay. So, or lefanav, right, or you can bring it, right, carrying it with your hands, whatever. Right? So that, by the way, that implies also you shouldn't put them into like a, like a cart, and like push them around like that also, because that also looks like, you put like 5 jugs into a cart, and you push them around. That also looks like weekday activity, the same thing. Even though you're not really carrying it per se, you're just pushing it, but still looks like weekday activity. Okay, whatever, right? That's the story there. So,
is it allowed to like have your children help you, like go in the group? Everybody
yeah, well, yeah, I mean, the point is, right, that if each one is carrying like, one, so then we got no problem, right?
So even if
We
it
only
goes-
don't want that. What we don't want is one person should be carrying like 4 or 5.
Okay, but even if it's for the same household, that's okay?
I mean, the rabbis didn't decree on that, so you can get away with that. You know what I mean? No problem. Yeah. Jews are very creative people, they know how to get around all this. Right? They know how to make loopholes. Okay, all right, there. So if you're creative, that's good for you, Baruch Hashem. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so good. So then he goes on here, right? Says Bet Yosef, he comments on this. ומשמע מדבריו, דבמוליך כדין בחוץ במקום ראויים דווקא ההוא דאמינן דלא יביאם בשר לקופה. אבל מטלטל במקום שאין ראויים, כגון מזווית לזווית, right, באותה בית מביא כי הכי דבעי. So, okay. So interesting, right, what he says here. Good point, he points out here. So he says, right, that which we say don't carry, there's like big loads. So he says, when does that apply? It only applies when people are like watching you, like in other words, you're outdoors, But if you're just doing it in your house, from one room to another, like who sees you, right? Nobody sees you. So therefore it's allowed. You know what I mean? That's the whole thing. That's what he says here. He deduces this from the language of Rashi. Whatever. Something like that. Interesting. So if you're just doing it in your house, right, you can do whatever you want. Nobody's watching you. So there's not going to be any suspicion there, whatever, anything like that, right? Okay, it's very interesting. Okay, so let's see Shulchan Aruch here. Right, so says Shulchan Aruch like this. Even though it was permitted, right, to carry on Yom Tov, as we said, right, no problem to carry. Even if you don't really need to carry that stuff. But he says, you know what? Don't like carry like big loads, as we said, right? Like you do on weekdays. So you have to do shinui. Right? Kids at how so? So if he's bringing, right, jugs of wine, right, from one place to another, as we said, so don't put them in like in a big container, and like carry them around like that. Right, 4 and 5. But you have to remember one thing, right? That these jugs, they're not like the bottles that we have today, right? Which are very small. These jugs are large, you know what I mean? So like one jug is, could be like 6 bottles of wine in there, So that's why you don't really need more than that, right? How much can you drink, Right, that's the thing. So, but when it comes to bottles, you can drink a few bottles, no problem, right? If you have a, company, you can, you can put down, 2-3 bottles, no problem, right? Nobody's going to say anything about that. Okay, so, right, we're talking about jugs, right? But bottles, you can just like carry them in your hand, like 2, 3, 4, what's the problem, right? You can do that, no problem. So we're not talking about that. Okay, so these jugs are large, They're like 6-packs, whatever, right? Whatever you call them, right? Or 12 packs, right? Something like that. So, okay, good. So, אלא יביאם על כתפו או לפניו אחד או שניים למוכח לצורך יום טוב במים. Right? So he says, what do? Right? Put it on your shoulder, right? 1 or 2, or like, carry it in your arms, right? And so this way people know you're doing it for Yom Tov. Okay, so says the Ramah here, ודווקא כשמוליכים ממקום למקום, it says only that's when you're going from one place to another, as we said, right? אבל בין זווית לזווית, but if you're just going, like in one house, from one corner to another, who cares about that, right? Oh, we bet the bite the right? Or he says he adds even more to this, right? He says even if you are going from one house to another in the courtyard, right? So in other words, you're not going the public domain at all. You're allowed to do it. He says you're allowed to do it, no problem, right? Yeah, interesting, by the way. This courtyard business, right? The Bet Yosef did not bring, by the way. So this Ramah is a little bit more lenient than what we saw in the Bet Yosef. Okay, so so Maran doesn't agree with that. In other words, going from one house to another in the courtyard, because after all, people do see you in the courtyard. You have neighbors there, so people will see you. So that makes more sense. Okay, whatever, right? In my little mind, makes more sense. Whatever. So that's the story there. And that's why, right? He points out over here, in the Ramah, that there's two different sources over here, right? In other words, the first one, which is talking about going from one place to another in the house, that comes from Bet Yosef, right? In the name of Rashi. That we already saw there. But the second piece, which he talks about, in one courtyard, that's Or Zarur. It's a different source, you see? So Bet Yosef didn't bring that, right? So therefore, right, we have a machloket here a little bit here. Okay, there you go, right? So that's that. Okay, so that was Chet. Okay, so I guess we'll continue next time, Bezat Hashem. We'll stop here. There's a few more things to do in this chapter. So thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. And we'll see you tomorrow, Bezat Hashem. Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov.
Kabot Harav, thank you so much.
God bless.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye.
God bless. All the best.